This presentation deals with the installation of the Epicor Eclipse Solar Interface. As mentioned before, there are a few interfaces to getting into the Eclipse system. The old eTerm text mode interface, which you still see in older sites and older implementations, and is occasionally used for administrative and database functions. Solar is the main interface that's pushed nowadays and where all of the new features and settings are. And of course you also have products like the Eclipse Mobile, which is a very cool tool, which I think is highly underutilized, and also the Eclipse e-commerce system, which you could consider as another way of getting into the system of doing sales orders. So this is going to deal with the Solar interface install and general configuration. As mentioned before, Solar is a Java program. But even though it is written in Java, and Java is supposed to be operating system independent, Epicor has tweaked it in such a way that it will only install and operate correctly on Windows. I have heard that there are tweaks that you can do to get it to run on a Mac or a Linux box, but these are not supported by Epicor, and I don't know what those tweaks are, and God help you. So moving forward. Since the Solar install is dependent on Java, be sure to go to the Oracle website first and install the latest edition of the Java runtime environment for your Windows system. Back in the day, Epicor Eclipse used to put the latest runtime edition on the server, and you could download it from there, but since that was a very useful feature, they seemed to see fit to take it away. In order to get to the Solar installer, put in the IP address of your Eclipse server in an open web browser using port 2080, that's :2080 with the IP address, and you'll get the main installation page. Coincidentally, this is also the access point for the Eclipse help manual for eTerm and Solar. This manual is extremely dense, highly complicated, and somewhat confusing, but it is a very good manual, and if you have the patience to read it, it will tell you just about anything that you'd ever want to know about the basic functions of the system. Be that as it may, get to this page and click on Install Now. After you click on Install, the Java installer stub will be downloaded to your local machine. Most web browsers are going to nag you that this is a potentially harmful file, as you see down here in this lower message on the web browser page, and of course tell it keep, because it's perfectly fine. After you've kept it, click on it to run it. When the installer starts, it will start downloading the rest of the application from the server and configuring the Solar environment and Java. You will normally get a warning message from Java about this application running, and of course you want to tell it yes, it's perfectly okay to run, and you probably want to check on the do not nag me again about this, and it will continue doing its installation. Depending on where the server is and the speed of your network connection, it usually takes under 60 seconds for Solar to continue its installation and present you with a login. If your Java installation is out of date, you might get a warning message and the installer might crap out. Go ahead and update your system to the recent version of Java and start again. After the install is completed successfully, it will create an icon automatically on your desktop marked Solar, that pretty thing that you see down there on the lower right, and it will present you with the login into the system. At this point, do not log in. You'll want to go to Preferences and put in the terminal ID first. If you don't do this, every time you log into Solar, it's going to ask you for what location you're in, and aggravatingly, every sales order you do, you're going to have to select what branch you're in, which gets annoying. So be sure to go to Preferences and put the terminal ID in first and save it. If you don't know what terminal ID you're supposed to put in, you can look at the configuration of one of the coworkers next to you or ask your system administrator. What a terminal ID is it's a way of it's partly a security function and partly a way of grouping the terminals with the nearest printers. Typically a terminal ID denotes what branch you're physically sitting at and what functional area you're in, and that way the system knows when you go to do a sales order or other functions, whether or not you're authorized to do that function from where you're at, and what printer is going to print out the sheet of paper where you're at. Obviously, if you're in a branch in Northern California and you log in and you give it a terminal ID for Arizona, and you complete the sales order, you're going to wonder where your ticket is because it just got spit out in Arizona. After you've entered and saved your terminal ID information and logged in successfully, you will be presented with the Solar main menu and interface. And now your menu items might be much shorter than this one. This is the full listing, but normally when your system is set up, there are authorization keys, templates, and custom menus that are created for each job function. These are security mechanisms to make sure that people who shouldn't be looking at something like, say, AR or the general ledger wouldn't even have access to the menus to know that the functions were there. If you're a small shop, typically you have everybody doing everything, and so everybody has one giant menu, but larger operations will have much more stunted menu items. Once you've presented with this, in the upper right hand corner you'll see a gear, and that gives you access to the general settings again in case you need to tweak something in the Solar preferences. Typically the defaults are good enough, but in some cases you might want to change the font. A note on changing the fonts on your interface, which apparently can only be done after you log in, for reasons I'm not really sure of. As you can see, the default fonts and color scheme that Eclipse uses is gray on gray with a gray background and gray letters. And it's usually, I think, about a 10-point font or so. So for old eyes, this might get a little hard. This is why I would suggest, for if you're having a little trouble seeing, try changing the font. In this screen here, I'm showing changing it to bold regular. A word of caution: you may have to try this several times before you find something that works right. It's entirely possible, as I just tested with this, that when I got into sales order entry, I thought I had changed the font correctly, but apparently I got a setting wrong, and everything was unreadable and squished down too far to make sense out of. Don't panic. If you see that, go back to this again and click on the Use Default Font, and that'll reset it back to normal. Eclipse is a fairly complex system with lots of subsections and submenus to get into, and if you've got a job function like this where you've got almost all of the menu options, it's easy to get lost in it. One of the godsends of it in this new interface is something called My Favorites, where if you have the common sets of things that you use, you can go ahead and select them off the menu, right-click on them, and add them to your favorite, and that will shorten things up tremendously. Also, if you're not entirely sure of what you're looking for, you can see up at the top there they've got a search function, which is pretty good, and if you type in a fairly close approximation, it will get you to where you need to go, and then you can create the shortcut and My Favorites from there. Here you see a shortcut I've created for sales order entry. It's nice, quick, easy, and of course you can also take things off the list as easily as you put them on. And as you can see, the interface is fairly simple and easy to poke around in. It's more of a Mac type of interface for anyone familiar with using Mac applications. In Windows, typically when you open a program, you've got one main window that you operate out of. With Mac applications, you tend to have a main window and then little sub windows that will pop out and operate independently. And the Solar interface is more like that, which we'll get into later. This is extremely handy because under the eTerm interface it was really difficult if you had to operate in two different places in the system at the same time to juggle things around in just one window. Now with this you can have a sales order entry open and customer maintenance open and AR inquiry open at the same time and be doing different things in all of them, and it's really pretty handy. I believe one of the greatest strengths about the Eclipse Solar interface, and I use it grudgingly, coming from an eTerm background, it's just faster for the maintenance functions that I do. and is less quirky. But for the rest of the company, for ordinary users and normal job functions, the solar interface is a significant improvement in their daily work life. Eclipse, the way the system is set up, it runs off of a series of queues. So a particular thing will be done by one user, and that'll get dumped into a bucket or queue for the next person in the value chain to check and add things on. In eTerm, this was a passive type of system, so in order to get at the queues and use them, you had to be proactive and go check them yourself. There wasn't really anything in the interface that prompted you. With the solar interface, it's flipped around completely on its head, and now you can create what's called widgets on the system, and several levels of widgets, to where these queues are displayed and they stay active, and they will actually even flash at you or make noises if you prefer. And this makes the system much more proactive, so it makes it much easier for people to perform their work functions, because the system is actively telling you when things are in the queue and when things need to be worked on. This really is a value add to the system. There are, I guess, all kinds of custom widgets that can be created, but the system has a pretty good base of existing widgets for all of the queue functions that you might need, and if set up properly, it can really be a boon to your productivity. They're very easy to do. It's just a matter of opening up in the main menu, right-clicking and selecting, Add Widget, and here you're presented with a listing of the common widgets. If you're doing anything in sales, a very common one is the Open Order Status Review queue, which you see here, and you have a variety of sizes and icons and I believe colors, although I'm not seeing it in front of me, that you can add in here. Here's an example of the Sales Order Review queue widget that we just created. As you can see, it's a fairly simple process, provided you have the authorizations already set up for your account, and if not, ask your administrator, because sometimes they forget to do that. And the information will pre-populate. You can set it to recheck at a certain interval. You can have it flash. You can have it give you information for everyone in the queue or just particularly you, and make this a pretty responsive thing that will give you a heads up right in front of you. Double-clicking on the widget will give you access to the queue and the information that you were looking for, allowing you to go through and do the things that you need to do. As you can see, very powerful, and it saves several keystrokes, and it's proactive. The downside of this, you could argue that by the time you're done doing all these customization widgets, the thing looks like a Fisher-Price toy with blinking, bleeping, multicolored nonsense. But really, if done properly, it can be pretty elegant and extremely powerful. If you need to get up from your desk for a little while and you've got something sensitive on your screen and you don't want something tampering with it, you of course have the ability to lock the screen for a period of time. At the end of the day, you can log out using the same menu and click Log Out, or simply click the X. Keep in mind that you have to have all of the other little sub-windows that you may have hidden under something else closed first, or else the system will nag at you. You see in the lower bottom there where it says Open Windows, the system, the main menu here will help you hunt up any little sub-menus, sub-windows that you have open up and might have hidden behind something else, so you can close it all out gracefully. And that's pretty much the end of the general info here on the interface. Obviously, your phantom messages and your print queue and your job queue are all up here at the top, and nice icons. When something new comes in, it'll present you with a little indicator on it, just like your cell phone, all fancy. Eclipse went through some great trouble to put shortcut keys into things, so everyone coming back from an eTerm background, if you are worried about being frantically losing your hotkeys to move around in the system, they've done a pretty good job of of preserving those or coming up with equivalents. In some cases they've had to change them a bit. Probably the biggest thing that aggravates eTerm to solar users is an eTerm you're used to hitting escape to commit and F12 to cancel or abort, and in solar it's reversed, but you get used to it fairly quickly. For those people like me that have to do administrator functions, you can see off this menu as well you have a start eTerm session, which you can do to bounce back and forth if you need to. And that pretty much completes what I have to say on the general installation. I hope this presentation was helpful and slightly informative, or if nothing else, at least not wildly inaccurate and misleading. And with that, until next time.